I'm Jim Tech. You're watching Kelowna Now with me.
Renee Merrifield.
And we're back every Tuesday, and we're going to talk about Beyond the Ballot. The big story that's all over the place, though. We can start there. Canada to become a U.S. state.
The 51st state. Yeah, CBC is all over this morning saying, oh, it was a joke. And the minister that was sitting there says it was a joke. But honestly, there's a little bit of truth to every joke that Trump tells. And I would not take anything lightly that he utters. He's been known to make good on his jokes or his threats in the past.
Fox News reported that it was said, like that Trudeau said first, that the 25% tariffs would kill the Canadian economy, and that was his retort.
Yeah.
Like if you can't fix Canada to stop punishing the Americans, then maybe you should just become a U.S. state and you can be a governor.
Well, we talked about this last week, where Trump is very specific. He's gonna put these 25% tariffs on both Mexico and Canada until the border has stopped with illegal immigration and with drug crossing the borders. I mean, Canada's response to that was so lackluster. In our minister coming out and saying, "Well, we're going to get some more helicopters and drones." Okay, yeah, let's retool our border crossing, and that will fix everything. That is way too little, way too late, and doesn't actually get to the root of the problem, which is our port system and how it's actually coming into Canada.
I was going to say that seaport thing is the big problem. Right?
Exactly. So I think that, with such a lackluster response from Trudeau and the government, Trump is going to double down, and not just double down, but triple down. And so his response to Trudeau in saying, like, yeah, if it's going to destroy you, well, you better, why don't you just become one of us? I'll take over and I'll deal with your issues. It's an embarrassment to Canadians, and really, it's sad that was the first interactions of our two leaders.
Supposedly, Trudeau is going to have a meeting with Poilievre and Singh today.
I heard that.
I guess the Bloc as well, to kind of brief them on that meeting.
I think it's going to be to try and milk some advice, try and figure out what would you guys do on this. I don't think Singh has any leg to stand on at this point. The photo all over the internet on the weekend was him getting out of the Maserati. I just think he's so disingenuous, and he's lost so much of his voice because he's just very hypocritical in how he lives, in the type of watch that he wears, in the clothing that he wears, and then the people that he proposes to represent. So I don't really see that as being anything that Trudeau would listen to, but I do think that Poilievre has a very different stance than what Trudeau has right now, and I think that Trudeau could be looking for some real advice.
Well, what was Katie Telford doing at the table?
No idea.
Like, seemed odd to me.
Chief of staffs. I mean, regardless of whether or not you've been in government before, but if you've watched House of Cards or The Diplomat, your chief of staff is not sitting at a table with all of the elected officials around.
Seemed odd.
That is bizarre. And why she would be there, and why she would possibly be accompanying him on a trip of that magnitude, but you don't sit at the table and actually participate in that type of conversation. You would have your high-ranking ministers, you might have your deputy prime minister, but that was just bizarre that she would be sitting there.
Poilievre should have been there.
Yeah, probably.
Trump should have said, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah, no doubt. I'm incoming. Hold on to your hats and sunglasses. I'll be there. I'll be there within a year.
So Trump has made an effect already, because both Mexico and Canada have all of a sudden made borders an issue. You know what I mean? Before that, they kind of dance around and make kind of like platitudes and that, but now they've, like the Mexican president has broken up some migrant caravans. Canada's talking about doing, more, and they're talking more and more about doing more. So he has already had an effect in that regard.
100%.
Yeah.
A threat of tariffs of 25% would take trillions of dollars out of the Canadian economy. This is serious. And, you and I talked about this as one of the potential threats to Canadians if Trump was successful in winning. We are seeing that live streaming right now. And I think that ultimately, does Trump want to do it? that was big speculation as well on the weekend, and I don't think he
I
does.
don't either.
I
Yeah.
think that really what he wants is for the Canadian and Mexican governments to show that they've made enough of an effort and enough promises that will be pulled back.
He sh-
Will it be pulled back all the way? No, because the one thing that Trump wants as part of his legacy is that he did what he said, and in order for him to do what he says, then he's going to have to put some form of tariff in.
He is the art of the deal, and he knows how to negotiate, and he carries a big stick, and he's made some really big proclamations, and it seems to be working too. The Ukraine war now, even out of the UK, it sounds like they're saying, let's talk peace. We've never heard that.
No.
In the Up till now, we haven't heard let's talk peace, right? They actually killed a peace deal in the past. And then even what he just said about Hamas, like release those hostages or they'll be hell to pay. I think those are the exact words, hell to pay, if I'm in office that day and you haven't released those hostages.
Yeah, and anyone who's not on Twitter, don't recommend it. It's a little bit of a cesspool. But, Trump is tweeting these things out. Yeah. That basically, and it's like all caps and all, like, he's very emphatic about it. So I do think that what he's saying is not idle threats. The U.S. has the largest military. They have the most weaponry. They have the largest economy, despite being so much in debt. So they are able to make good on their threats. And yeah, he's putting the world on notice, and he wants to get things done very quickly that he would see as distractions from his main mandate, which is really to push the U.S. forward.
When he was president, he was actually having lunch with Xi, and he said that I'm going to bomb the S out of Syria, and he did, with a bunch of tomahawks.
Yep.
Right.
And so, yeah. So I mean, we definitely don't want to take things lightly. Right now, the Biden administration is escalating things, and not doing the work of peace. He's doing the work of basically.
Trying to light the house on fire.
Exactly. I mean, some are speculating, is it World War III that we're going to have before Trump comes in? I don't think so, because of that change of power. Most of the world will wait to see once Trump is in what happens.
You got to think that he's on the phone. He's like, listen, stop, right? Because even Michael Moore, who's a staunch Democrat, has said, what are you doing, Joe Biden? Yeah. What are you doing? And trying to ignite World War III in the Ukraine and Russia before he's done. And, the Israeli thing, all that stuff, it seems to be escalating. And then we're seeing some issues this morning out of South Korea. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did, yeah. They've declared martial law, which is very scary as well. It's unclear if martial law means the same thing in South Korea as it does here. There's accusations from the president that there was, basically the opposition is getting too friendly with those that are in North Korea. But still, I think if anything, we see a lot of unrest within the globe, and I don't know if Trump will be, nitro meets glycerin, or if it will actually be a calming effect to have a strong leader that is really still for democracy. So we have strong leaders in Putin. We have, you mentioned Xi as well. Those are strong leaders as well, very erratic leaders, very unpredictable leaders, but they are leaders that are not for democracy. So at least Trump, at his core is for some form of democracy.
The United States has been the world's policeman since World War II, and has carried that big stick. It has gotten weak under this this current administration, especially with the Afghanistan withdrawal. It has got pretty, that was pretty embarrassing, one of the more embarrassing moments for the American military.
It was horribly, horribly handled, brutally dealt with and done. And the stories are horrific as to some of those that worked alongside the governments and how, what their demise was.
A lot of reckoning on the left-leaning networks right now, because that pardon that they gave out, which is like a unprecedented pardon, because it was a pardon basically saying from this year, even crimes you haven't been committed, you're pardoned for those, right? So basically from 2014 to yesterday, you're pardoned, and that comes on the heels of so many people saying this would never happen, including Joe Biden, many times saying the same thing. And they're saying all this stuff he said about Trump turns out to be mostly gaslighting because now you're turning it around and saying that the DOJ is weaponized against Hunter Biden when it was, it just a lot of left leaning people are saying you better pardon Trump now too if you're going to do this, right? So
Yeah, and I would say that oftentimes when a party accuses another party of something, they need to look in the mirror. They're projecting their own issues onto that other party. In this particular case, Biden doesn't have anything to lose.
yeah.
He's already out. The Democrats don't have anything to lose because they're a disaster and kind of a train wreck since Biden. So and it's is it really Biden doing this? I have no idea.
I
I don't
mean,
know who's in the background
most people
or
from
who the puppet master is on that one.
family values would say, it's fine, it's a family thing, but it comes on the heels of all the saying that he'd never ever do that for family. You know what I mean? Like he would always put law and order first.
Well, and you look at the difference between leadership, or leaders, I should say. You look at the Obama administration and Obama himself and what he did for the Democratic Party and how he elevated the Democrats, etc., and how much that can shift when you have a leader with as much baggage as Hillary Clinton. There was just so much dirt that was being dug up, and who knows how much of it is true or how much of it is false, but regardless, it just doesn't look good. And then, to look at Biden and how far he's fallen over the course of his tenure as president, it just goes to show that who the leader is really important. And right now, that leader is going to be a really difficult one for Canada to deal with. Maybe not as much so with a stronger leader in play, but right now, the diplomacy that Trudeau likes to, hang his hat on is simply not going to work. He's going to get absolutely played with by Trump. And I hate to admit this, but I've actually read Trump's book. I think it's called The Art of the Deal.
I've read it too.
And one of the things he says is whoever is more emotionally committed to the outcome is it basically loses. And I think that in this case, the ideology that Trudeau has convinced himself is somehow superior will be his undoing in any negotiation against Trump. Because if he is more committed to that emotionally than what the outcome is for Canadians, I think that Canadians are going to end up being on the losing side of that.
Well, if we look at a lot of the stuff that the Trudeau and the Liberals have done, it's a lot of like trickery and gaslighting. Like this latest, we can move on to the GST thing if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
This GST, the latest thing where they try to keep confusing Canadians by saying it's groceries. It's not groceries per se. It's junk food, right? Yes, there's rotisserie chickens in there. Yes, there's diapers in there, but it's literally junk food, right?
And all over the internet, you look at social media, you're looking at the ticker tapes from the grocery stores and how little people are actually saving.
Yeah.
The parliamentary budget officer came out right away with their assessment saying, this $250 check that everyone's going to receive is actually going to cost every Canadian $322. So it's like we're already at a negative with respect to this, and this is in response. And Chrystia Freeland, that was a horrible interview. She's talking about the vibe session. And I mean, number one, nobody even knows what that is. Anytime you can get covered on SNL and This Hour Has 22 Minutes, like within, days, is a bad sign. But the whole vibe session, this is not a vibe. Stats Canada comes out right away with the GDP numbers, GDP per capita, and we're in an absolute free fall. 6 consecutive quarters we've been in free fall. So if people feel like they are, their money is not going as far and the cost of living is outstripping what they're making, it's because it is.
Right.
And for her to be so condescending and tell, the Canadian people that this is just a vibe that they're feeling, and that they're just emotional, and that because we're so emotional, they're going to respond with this like trinket of a GST abatement for 2 months. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And I'll remind the listeners that, like, honestly, this has not come into effect yet. This cannot come into effect unless it is passed by law through Parliament. and they are not going anywhere right now. That sucker is at a standstill to this day. So I don't see anything happening on this.
Yeah, and she said she got that term from an economist. Turns out she got it from an influencer, according to reports. Of course,
Okay.
there's the Trudeau government again, relying on social media influencers.
I would love to. I was about to say I would love to know who that economist is because that is not
Vibe session.
your vibe session. Yeah. So I just don't see it. I just don't see it at all. And what we're seeing in Canada, and what we're seeing, especially in the season, is a real increase on the number of people that are using food banks. We have seen that number rise to almost 2.5 million Canadians that are accessing food banks on a regular basis.
Rising crime, add that to it, right? Because we're now bigger than the US in crime, so for property crimes and that. So that's all. And I watched a video on Global did a story. They literally ripped the lady's tires off her car with a chain in Edmonton. All four of her tires were ripped off because now they're not only just stealing catalytic converters, they're stealing the tires, ripping them off the vehicles.
No, Canada is slowly fading into lawlessness, and it's a scary, scary thing when that happens. I mean, we've heard and we see what's happening with people stealing things on our very streets. And it feels like nobody is safe anymore. There is just a lot of crime out there. And some would say, well, that's because we have issues with people being able to earn money. Possibly, I would say that's the small minority. I think we have an issue with consequences and how bail reform has really undone what criminals fear, and that we don't have a strong enough justice system to actually enforce our laws. And instead, those that are being enforced are really against regular citizens who are taking matters into their own hands rather than against criminals who are doing the crimes in the first place.
How much time, money, and energy do you think the Liberals are wasting on this GST thing and trying to blame Polya for blocking it? Well, clearly he doesn't block anything because it's the NDP and the Liberals that do. It has nothing to do with Polya. But they spent so much energy pushing blame towards him and then advertising a tax break that means nothing and it's 2 months long.
It means nothing. It is a political trick. It is bad policy, which we talked about last week. Taking GST off of junk food is a bad policy. It's taking GST
bad
off
health
of
policy.
liquor is bad policy. Absolutely bad health policy, bad fiscal policy. Costing Canadians $6 billion is bad policy. This thing reeks of a desperate attempt by the Liberals to try and assuage the Canadian people. And when that check doesn't arrive, I don't think people will understand what's happened in Parliament that didn't allow that to get through. But I do think that, I'll be honest, I'm really happy that we're holding the Liberals' feet to the fire on the, missing hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in that green slush fund, and they need to start hundreds of billions of dollars, to Guilbeault's companies, the very environment minister. So we need to figure this out because it's a pretty
how are we even
time.
allowing ministers in that to allow their companies to kind of dip into this is, and it's not just him. This is just rife throughout. We've seen it time and time and again, and it's just and the documentation has never been provided, I don't think, for how many of these scandals are still they won't provide the documents and they talk nonsense, they talk over nonsense, and the media has not been doing its job to make sure one person, Holly Doan from Blacklock, carries the load.
Yeah.
Right? And meanwhile, you see articles from CTV and CBC talking about it looked like it was almost like sponsored content. Yeah. Trudeau giving GST break to I'm just like, what?
Yeah, I gotta hand it to our female journalists. This is totally an aside, but even in BC, look at the Katie DeRoses or the Penny Daflos. They are the ones that are digging. They are the ones that are doing the work and holding. Yeah. Yes, yeah. That's a good one out of the East. So you look at these and you gotta give them huge props because they are the ones that are actually holding governments to account, and regardless of their political stripes. Because mean, I couldn't really tell you where they fall on the partisanship, but I can honestly say they dig up the stories and they make sure that government is held to account.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of nonsense. Do you want to move on to BC?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we talked about a little bit about the food banks. I think that one of the statistics that came out this last week that was really heart wrenching for me was that in BC, 25% of those that are accessing the food bank are actually the working class. That means that they have jobs, they are not making ends meet. And I know this firsthand. Having been working as an MLA and working in the constituency office, we did see those individuals coming in. We saw those single moms who have full time jobs, but simply are not making ends meet. And are using food banks.
Yeah.
The seniors that are on pensions who have side hustles and part time jobs who literally would send me photographs on my phone of what they received for a month out of the food bank, and that is frightening to me. I mean, God bless the food banks, and anyone, if you can, if you have the means, please give generously, whether it's food items or whether it's money. But that to me is scary, and that percentage was higher in BC than anywhere across the country, and it's no wonder our GDP per capita is in a free fall.
Yeah, people say that they get angry. They see a BMW in the lineup at the food bank. They don't understand. They take a moment to understand that they likely can't get out of that car loan, and they likely are not able to make their car loan payments and their housing commitments because of the rise in rents and mortgages and that tells you how bad things really are, right?
Yeah.
That guy driving the BMWs in the lineup, people say, "Oh, well, you can just sell it." Lots of times they're underwater in those cars. Do you know what I mean? Like they owe a lot more money on that car than it's worth. So they just don't have, if they have to turn it in, then the bank wants the $15,000 they're underwater with, which they don't have.
Absolutely, or it's a lease,
Yeah.
and some of those leases are less expensive than a car payment. And if you don't have that money to buy,
Oh.
whether it's a Toyota Tercel or whether it's a BMW, if you don't have the money to put, to buy it outright, sometimes those leases you can get with little down, and once you're locked in, just like you said, if you try and take it back early, you're going to owe thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, and sometimes they'll just try and think, next month will be better, next month will be better, next month will be better.
Yeah, instead of judging, perhaps it's time to open your mind and if you can, open your wallet and try to help people, because there is a lot of people in need across Canada, and BC seems to be hurting more than most. And it seems odd even at this time that our government has suspended legislature for into the new year, which seems odd. I mean, Gavin Dew, I had him in. He was saying that David Eby's curled up hiding under his desk, and I know he has a fragile government, right? With he hasn't made his deals yet with anybody or the Green Party, but. No.
I've heard that there's still negotiations going on with the Green Party, so they'll see. We'll see what comes of that. I just don't think that Eby will be able to agree to anything that the Greens are asking for without sabotaging his next election. So I think that's going to be a huge issue still. And is he curled up? Eby? No. Number one, he's too tall to curl up under his desk.
Like a George Costanza.
Yeah, totally. But the other thing I would say about Eby is that he's too arrogant. I mean, he's very strategic though. So right now he doesn't have his mandate letters out. He's already signaled in some of his ministerial posts that, he's reshuffling things inside of, not just with people, but also the actual ministries are going to change and alter a little bit. And with that, I think that, he's trying to give some time for all of that to settle out. Now, what I would say, though, is that the scary thing for me is that there's a lot of legislation that the British Columbian people could utilize right now that's just not happening. And instead, he can hide. Fall sessions, can be that. Or if there isn't a lot on their agenda, they can do that. But it's tenuous, and he only has, one vote away from, demise. So I think that he's going to be a little bit more careful about that.
And it seems like that, while British Columbians are hurting, he made sure that his MLAs were not hurting, and everybody kind of got a raise.
Oh, they did. They didn't just get raises. They all got, big beefy, upgrades. It's disgusting to me. You and I discussed
Yeah.
that as well. I mean, I think it's absolutely gross. And yes, there's more work for some of those posts, but to arbitrarily give every single person in your 47-person caucus an increase is disingenuous. And if I was an MLA sitting there and everyone got a post or a position, I would be so
Is
irate that I was actually pushed to that. That I was there. There were nothing special about any of the different MLAs.
is leadership not by example? And in a time when Britons are hurting, shouldn't you try to like feel some of their pain as opposed to take more from the trough?
Yeah, unless you're trying to get them their pension and trying to get their pensions beefed up. I mean, this is an issue with the federal government. That's why Jagmeet Singh is pushing the election to where it is. It's also an issue with the BC government. There are many of those NDP MLAs that were elected back in 2020 for the very first time. They need 2 more years to get their pensions. Not having a fall session is a great way to elongate that, and then giving them all a bump will mean that their pensions get
Well,
a raise
Brett
as well.
Wilson, former Dragon Den star, has offered to pay Jagmeet his pension if he just calls an election.
Oh, it would be so
Get him
helpful.
another Maserati.
It would be so helpful to all.
Brett Wilson, very outspoken guy.
Yes, he is. He is, and we're seeing that, right? Whether it's Kevin O'Leary or whether it's Brett Wilson, we're seeing a lot of Chip Wilson during the last election. We're seeing those really big leaders. In the business community, really taking a leadership role. And I mean, for anyone who doesn't understand or doesn't know what happened with the BC United, it was the business community that literally said, we need one of you to stand down. Kevin, we're going to ask you to do so because the polls are right now in John's favor. But I'll be honest, not having a fall session is really good for John. He's got brand new MLAs that have no clue what's going on, and it gives them an opportunity to everything from getting their offices up and running to really doing some training. I mean, we saw in the election that they weren't doing debates, they weren't doing forums, they weren't answering questions, they weren't talking to the media. This has to change, and that is part of the role and the job of an MLA, is to stand up and to voice your constituents' needs. And so I think that right now they have a great opportunity of shoring that up, getting some good training in place, and hopefully they're taking this time to do that.
Do you think some of the business leaders in Canada find some courage in that what happened in the United States, like, with Bill Ackman, Elon Musk, Chamath, and a bunch of, these people that came out in support of more of an economy that is business generated, where you can generate more, as opposed to like even Mark Zuckerberg now is at the table and said, and Bill Gates is even has to be at the table now.
Yeah.
And it just seems like all of a sudden people want it to have what they're calling like a golden age in the United States. And do you think some of the Canadian business leaders are now saying we got to do the same?
The only thing I can say is I hope so. Like, I hope we see a bigger Canadian voice. The reason that business and our economy isn't doing really well is we've seen a huge exit of investment dollars out of Canada. Why is that? Because the business community is seen as very weak in Canada. Why is that? Because we've convinced Canadians that being in business is somehow bad and that being profitable is somehow bad. My kids, when they were growing up, sometimes had a difficult time understanding what's a developer or what do you do in real estate? And I would tell them, honey, I go to work every single day and I feed 100 families. And that was what I saw my job and my role and my task is. It's why I built a company in the way that I did for sustainability. And that's why Troika's been around for 25 years, feeding families. Why? With paychecks. Yeah. And with making sure that we have great paying jobs that are moving our economy forward. We are not going to make it with the increase in the public sector and not having the same and should be a larger increase. I mean, when the BC Liberals left government in 2017, five jobs in the private sector for every one job in the public sector. Right now, that is almost exactly reversed. So we need to stop that, and in order to do that, the business community has to rise up and actually find its voice and say, this is what's good for our economy and this is what's not good for our economy, and be like the advocate for the Canadian and British Columbian, in this case, economy.
This capital gains tax that they're doing is just going to be like you can hear the door opening and money rushing out,
especially for certain demographics. right? Like especially for like the doctors, the ones that we
Professionals,
need,
yeah.
the professionals,
Yeah.
right? Like the ones that we are so desperate for,
Yeah.
and the ones that have experienced the most amount of growth in the private sector are those very professional associations, as well as doctors and physicians that we need, that are going to be the first ones running out the door.
I really think, like, I mean, looking at it from as an accountant, the finance minister and her group seem not to have like people that are like have common sense business practices. They're more about ideological kind of like things, and it seems so superficial what they do.
Well, they rely on ideology when it no longer makes sense, right? Like they have to they're in a death loop right now with how much they've spent and overspent, and the only way to get themselves out of that death loop or death spiral is to actually do one of two things. They either have to start cutting and cutting their spending, or they have to start taxing. And so now they're
Or they
looking.
could grow the GDP.
Right.
But who wants to do that?
So those two options right now are such that they're going to look for more and more ways to tax, because they don't want to have to think about.
Would it be fair to say that the Trudeau government is more of a distribution kind of like government, where they want to tax and distribute the money, whereas opposed like to a Trump is more about growing that pie?
Absolutely. And I'll remind our listeners here, when we were in the 90s, I don't know if people remember that headline where it talked about the Canadian peso. Our dollar had fallen to such an extent that our Canadian economy was literally in a horrible state. And really what happened then is that we had a prime minister, as well as they called them the Dream 11 or something, where it was like different parties represented all the way across Canada, with the premiers, as well as our prime minister at the time was Liberal, and they literally righted the ship. And when I look back at that time frame, it took 4 years. That's all it took, 4 years for them to like literally right the ship. But in order to do so, they got into an austerity budget and mindset. They only spent on things that stimulated the economy. That was their whole thing. Is this going to grow our economy? Yes. Okay, we'll spend. No,
if we spend $1, makes $2. That
totally.
makes sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And in those times, that's when you do spend on infrastructure, on things like the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That Trans Mountain Pipeline right now is 0.25 of our entire GDP. That is massive. So out of the 2% or full 2% of our GDP, 0.25 of that was actually the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which exceeds all of BC's GDP contribution, which is unheard of, like absolutely mind-boggling that we would stop that.
Well, we've been over a half hour, so
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to wrap with, or?
No, just you know what? I will go back to that one point, which is during the season, it's it's a hard one for people. And so if you are able to, whatever you are able to, just really try and fill up our food banks for those that are in need. It's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, and I do believe the sun is coming up and help is on the way. So, and I believe that with technology and everything, and with a mindset that's going to hopefully United States affects us or infects us with that prosperity, and we see a better tomorrow for Canada.
I like that.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent news.